I was angry with my friend, I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe, I told it not, my wrath did grow. And I watered it in fears, night and morning with my tears, and I sunned it with smiles, and with soft deceitful wiles. And it grew both day and night, till it bore an apple bright, and my foe beheld it shine, and he knew that it was mine. And into my garden stole, when the night had veiled the pole. In the morning glad I see my foe outstretched beneath the tree.
First, the speaker describes how he is angry with his friend. When he told his friend, his anger went away. Then the speaker is angry with his enemy, but doesn't tell him. His anger continues to grow, described as a plant, and he waters it with his tears and anger. The plant, his anger, continues to grow and bears fruit. The enemy then steals the apple at night. The apple poisons the enemy and kills him, and when the speaker discovers the enemy lying dead in the morning, he is very glad. The theme of this poem is the consequences that anger can result in. The speaker hides his anger, which results in the eventual destruction of both people. In the end, the speaker not only brought down his enemy, but he himself became morally corrupt. He stood over a dead body and was happy. The subject of the poem is suppressed anger.
The author's tone is that of caution. The author is warning the reader of the dangers of holding in your feelings. He starts off the poem with a good example of how to deal with issues you have with other people. I was angry with my friend, I told my wrath did end. He then moves into the adverse effect of not handling the situation properly. I was angry with my foe, I told it not, my wrath did grow. The point of view in this poem is that of the narrator, first person. It is also ironic that the narrator describes the apple from his tree as bright and shining because it is poisonous and deadly.
A lot of the diction is abstract, using words such as anger, fear, wrath, and hate. However, there is some concrete diction such as the apple, tears, and the garden, however figurative they may be. This poem alludes to the Grimm brothers' tale of Snow White because in that story, the evil queen also used a poisoned apple that appeared beautiful and tempting to take out her enemy. There is also an allusion to the book of the Bible, Genesis, in which Adam and Eve eat an apple that leads to their downfall with God. There is some choice word order in this poem that is irregular from normal speech patterns, such as I told it not, into my garden stole, and glad I see. The author uses his words on a higher level than the literal level. The entirety of this poem is a conceit, as he is talking about a man's anger growing into a tree that sprouts poisonous fruits. This shows a higher level of thinking.
The poem talks about how the narrator plants and grows a tree which eventually bears an apple. Normally this would mean something positive because the growth in nature is typically seen as being prosperous. However, in this context, the tree represents the growth of anger. The connotation in this text regarding the tree is uneasiness that the reader feels while observing the narrator's wrath take shape. The reader should feel an ominous sensation exuding from the narrator's description of his tree's growth, especially when the apple is described as bright and shining. One of the largest symbols in the poem is that of the apple. The apple symbolizes the hate that grew on the metaphorical tree. Both symbolize the growth of anger and deceit when those emotions are hidden.
There is visual imagery in lines 10 and 11, till it bore an apple bright, and my phone beheld it shine, with the description of the bright, shiny apple. There is also imagery in when the night had veiled the pole, from line 14, that describes that the foe came on a dark, foggy night to steal the apple. The imagery sets the mood of the poem and gives the reader a vivid image of the scene, and allows them to feel as though they are experiencing this for themselves. It also shows how anger can cloud a person's judgment, just as the night clouds the pole.
The entire poem is a direct comparison between anger and an apple tree. As the speaker bottles up his anger, it grows like a tree until it explodes, creating a poisonous apple. Repetition occurs mainly at the beginning of phrases. In the first stanza, for example, each line begins with I was or I told. In the next few stanzas, and I or and with or and he is repeated. The human trait of watering a plant is personified as the narrator fears watering the tree. Personification also takes place when the narrator states that I told my wrath did end. There is also irony in this poem. The largest amount of irony in this poem is the fact that the narrator uses words such as fears and tears as if he were the victim, even though it is the enemy that winds up dead. There is also irony in lines 5 through 8 as the speaker is describing how he grew his anger. In lines 5 through 6, he says he waters it with fears and tears. This is ironic because water is usually seen as clean and pure, but he is using it more as fuel for a fire. Also, he is not literally watering a plant with his tears and fears, but using his fears and sadness to build up his anger even more. Lines 7 and 8 describe him sunning it with smiles and tricks. Again, he is not literally sunning a plant, but using tricks and gimmicks to get revenge.
In line 5, the word watered, and in line 7, the word sunned, are examples of metonymy because they describe a plant growing. Synecdoche is used in this poem with the apple standing for all of his anger. There is a paradox in this poem, the fact that the poison, which is associated with death, whereas trees normally represent the growth and life. The title itself represents a paradox, although it is carried out through the entire poem.
Many sound devices are used throughout this poem. Anaphora is present in this poem with the lines mainly starting with the word and. Euphony is also present because the entire poem has a euphonous flow to it due to the sole use of softer consonants such as B's, F's, W's, and S's. Alliteration is found in words such as sunned and smiles, friend and foe, bore and bright. The poem also uses end rhyme, and it is consistent with a rhyming scheme of AABB, friend and end, foe and grow, etc.
The prevailing rhythm in the poem is split evenly between being trochaic and iambic. Every other line pattern sticks throughout most of the poem. The meter of the poem is tetrameter. Some lines are written in trochaic trimeter and have a leftover syllable.
The form of this poem is closed form. Lines 2, 4, 14, and 16 are written in iambic tetrameter. Other lines are written in trochaic trimeter, but often have a leftover seventh syllable. The rhyme scheme is AABB, containing 4 quatrains and 2 couplets in each quatrain. This form is significant to the poem because the comfortable repetition of the lines give the reader an ease with following along with the story so that they can fully absorb the message that is trying to be conveyed.